Hello and welcome to this tutorial. In this tutorial, we would be learning how to do a federated authentication using Google Identity Provider. So for this, we would be using wso2 as an identity server, which will use Google Federation to get the user authenticated. To do that, I have my identity server running on my local, and also I got an Java application which it will be trying to do authentication through Google. So to start up that, the first thing what you need to do is you need to go into the credentials, the Google developer console, which is console.developers.google.com, and this is the dashboard which you will see. So you get into the credentials tab, and the first thing which you need to do is create a credential. So in this case, we will be using OAuth client ID. So the moment you click on OAuth client ID, so you will get a OAuth client ID console where you can go and give what type of application you are trying to configure. In my case, this will be a web application. You can choose whatever you are working on. So you can give a you can give any name. So I'm giving it as training app. So you can give like probably it's a OAuth, which you can say as any name which is relevant to your application which you can remember. So yeah, so the next important step is you need to provide an authorized redirect URIs. So the Google server should know where it has to redirect this to. So this will be your uh, identity server common auth. So this is where actually the WSO2 identity server will look for a response from a identity provider like Google, Facebook, or any of these. So once you are done with it, go ahead and create it. So this will give you a client ID and client secret when it is successfully created. This is where you get the client ID and client secret. So what I will do is I will copy this for my future reference, because I'll have to give this um, client ID, and I copy this client ID and client secret, and I will copy this client secret and keep it for my future reference. That's it. You can give OK, and you don't need to do anything on the API console. Get into WSO2 management console. Two things very important. The first one is you need to provide an identity provider. So if you go to the identity providers here, so go and add the identity provider. So you can give any I will give a name as training identity provider IP. So you can give any of the name whichever is suitable to you. And what you have to do is, like, you don't need to give any of the other information. You can just leave it like this. The alias is already taken up here. So you need to go and put the federated authenticators. So if you see it here, there are quite a few federated authentication which WSO2 supports, among which we are interested in Google configuration. First thing is go and enable the Google configuration and give the client ID and client secret we just copied now. So this is my client ID and this is my client secret which is generated. So it will be in your case whatever you get generated. Remember, you need to give the same URL localhost 9443 common auth, which is the common entry point for any of this third-party federated authentication. Scope is OpenID, and once that is done, you can go and register it. So as you register it, you will see the training identity provider has just got registered. So now you need to go to the service provider and add the service provider for this. So the service provider is something which will connect, the application will try to connect, and that knows there's an external identity provider and will go and do a federated authentication. So I will give training service provider. You may choose any of the name which is relevant to you, and I will register this. Once you register it, there are two important things which you need to give. You can give description and all that stuff if you want, but the very important thing is inbound authentication configurations. So you need to go into this OAuth OpenID Connect configuration and go and configure it. Remember the OAuth version, there are two options here. I will go with this 2.0, which is the default, and this is very important, the callback URL. So in my case, it's a Java application listening on 8080 port, and the application name is pickup dispatch, and it has got a OAuth2 client endpoint. So you have to choose your endpoint where you are doing the federated authentication within your application. Okay, so rest all you can keep it as default. If at all you want to change any of this expiry, refresh token and other things, so you can go and adjust it accordingly. I'll keep everything as default for now and then go and add this. Once you add this, you will get a message as registered successfully, and now you will see a client key and a secret generated. So you need to keep this handy as well. So I'm going to copy this as wso2 credentials. This one is client ID, and client secret. The client secret is, you can see by clicking on show, and then you can hide it if you don't want it to be exposed. Okay, so I copied these. Now there is another important thing which you need to do. There is a thing called local and outbound authentication configuration. Go and click on this. Now you have to tell do a federated authentication, not the default. So here you have got your in the drop down it will show all the identity providers which you added. So I'm going to add this training identity provider which we created as part of this setup, and then go and update it. So that's it. So now what has happened is your identity server is already set up, and it has generated an client ID and client secret, and your service provider knows that it has to go and do a federated authentication through the identity provider, and your identity provider knows that there is a Google federation which has been set up. So what happens now is, if you go you have to go to your application and give the service provider credentials. So in my case, as I mentioned, it's a Java application, so I need to go into the particular project and go and change the configuration. So I got a properties called dispatch.properties. So I will go and change my client ID and client secret to what is generated just now. So this is my client ID which is generated, and this is my client secret which is generated. I will save this file, and now I need to build this application. So what I would do is, since it's a Java application, I use Maven. Go to the folder location and do this mbn clean install. So this will actually build my application, and the result of which will be the deployable war file which I'll be taking and deploying it on the server. So it can take a while because it has to go and compile everything. So I got a build success message. So that means the war file is built. So I can go and check it on my application. So this will be there in the target folder. So if you see, it's already been built at the timestamp. Okay, so what you can do is now I can go and deploy this on Tomcat. So you may choose any of your server where you want to deploy your application. So once you log in, so I got an application with the same. I will undeploy this and then go and choose the file, which is the war file which I just built, and deploy that. So after deployment, it will appear here. So now this is the standard login screen of this application. On click of login, it should not give me to enter a user ID or password here, but rather take me to the Google Federation or the Google uh, login screen where I need to do a Google authentication. I'll click on it. There you go. So it went into accounts.google.com to do the federated authentication. So on successful authentication here, this will route me back to my identity server, where I can, in this case there is a checkpoint here. There you go. The application comes back to your one by doing the federated authentication. So this is how you can achieve your uh, Google Federation authentication using wso2 server, identity server. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, you can post it in the comment section. So I will be glad to assist you. Thank you.